So here's how to part for large knotless braids so that your part comes out clean, even, and full every time. Let's get right into it. Using our parting chart here on the screen, the first thing I like to do is measure the nape of the person's head that I'm working with. So some people have a wider nape, which is nape width that are more than 4 inches, and some people have a slender nape, which is nape width that are 4 inches or below. So if you're working with someone with a wider nape and the person wants the large knotless to be very full, you would have to create 2 rows at the nape and 4 rows above the ears. But if you're working with someone with slender nape and the person doesn't care about the braids being full and they don't want the braids to be too much, you can create 2 rows at the back of the head and 3 rows above the ears. So for measurements, when you're creating large size knotless or large size braids, I like to go 1.5 inches with my tape, or 1.5 the edge of the comb. As you can see, the comb that I'm using here is a rat tail comb, and the edge of the comb is 1 inch. So if you have this type of rat tail comb, you can use that as a measuring tool, and you go 1.5 the edge of the comb, or you can use your measuring tape and measure 1.5 inches just like this. And as you create the row, make sure you clean up the part. I normally like to start from creating a quadrant. So if you're a beginner in the house and you're pre-parting for braids, it's good to start from a quadrant so that it's easy for you to part both sides of the quadrant equally. So I'm going to take my comb and clean up the part. Now I'm going to measure this other side as well to make sure it's 1.5 the edge of the comb, and I'm going to clean that up. And if you are doing it on a real human head, you need to use your gel. Not too much gel, less is more. So when you create the part, you can just apply gel and clean up the part with the rat tail comb. On this other side, I'm going to do the same to complete the first row, and then I go ahead to pre-part the second row. So basically at the nape of the neck, I like to create 2 rows. So I'm going to work you through how many rows you need to create above the ears. So for above the ears, I like to start by creating our 1.5 inches row. So if you have a slender nape of neck, you'll be creating 3 rows above the ears. If you have a wider nape of neck and you also want the large knotless braids to look very full, you'll be creating 4 rows above the ears using our 1.5 inches measurement. So in total, for slender nape of neck, you'll be creating around 28 to 34 braids, depending on how full you want it to be. And for wider nape of neck, you'll be creating around 35 to 40 braids, depending on how full you want the braids to be. So for slender nape of neck, large size braids would be 5 rows, and for wider nape of neck, large size braids would be 6 rows if you want the braids to be full. Hopefully that makes sense. Now I'm going to show you how many braids per row you need to create for both slender nape and wider nape. For row 1 slender nape, you would create 3 braids, and for row 1 wider nape, you would create 3 braids. For row 2 slender nape, you would create 4 braids, and for row 2 wider nape, you would create 4 braids. As you create the parts for row 2 and above, make sure that the part on the current row you are creating falls between the part on the previous row. This is what gives you that bricklayered staggered braid look when you braid. So make sure that as you part, that your braids on the current row fall between the braids on the previous row. For row 3 slender nape, which is the first row above the ears, you would create 7 braids. For row 3 wider nape, which is also the first row above the ear, you will create 9 braids. For row 4 slender nape, you will create 8 braids, and for row 4 wider nape, you will create 8 braids. For row 5 slender nape, which is the last row for this nape size, you will create 6 braids. And for row 5 wider nape, which is the second to last row for this nape size, you will create 7 braids. For row 6 wider nape, you will create 6 braids, and this is the last row for the wider nape. So for wider nape, you will create 4 rows above the ears and 2 rows at the nape of the neck. While for slender nape, you would create 3 rows above the ears and 2 rows at the nape of the neck. So for slender nape, there is no row 6, and for wider nape, we have row 6. Hopefully that makes sense. So the total for slender nape would be around 28 to 34 braids, depending on how full you really want the large size braids to be. And the total for wider nape is usually around 35 to 40 braids, depending on how full you also want the braids to be on the wider nape. Hopefully that makes sense. For our visual learners in the house who may want to take a screenshot of this parting chart, you have it on here. The link to the downloadable version of the parting chart is also in the description box if you would rather have a downloaded version. And also, for our visual learners who want to actually see how many braids they need to create for each row, this is the braids per row sheet for slender nape and for wide nape. Feel free to take a screenshot as well. If you prefer a downloadable link, feel free to download the braids per row sheet from the description box as well. And that's how you part for large knotless braids or any form of large singles you are looking to get. If this video helped you in any way, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share this video with a friend. You may have a friend who is trying to create large size braids but they don't know how to part. Share this video with them, they may find it helpful. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss a thing when we actually post the rest of our knotless braid series. Thank you for joining me on this one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.